Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this conversation, I talk with my friend Erik Johnson. Erik is an applied behavioral scientist that improves organizational and individual performance with behavioral science, the study of human behavior and decision-making. He's the founder of Behavioral Strategies, a consulting practice helping organizations leverage behavioral science for growth and performance. Previously, he worked at Ideas 42 and on Morningstar's Behavioral Insights team. He co-created productpsychology.com and is a board member at Besky, an international nonprofit devoted to promoting applied behavioral science. So here we walk through some pretty deep and complex terrain, such as our overwhelming and sometimes adversarial information and media environment, and how behavioral science principles can apply at both the personal level and the systemic level to getting optimal outcomes and habits, as well as some conjecture on AI's potential effects on quality, attention, value, tons of stuff there. And throughout the conversation, you're going to be introduced to interesting concepts from behavioral science like dual processing theory, the labor illusion, and much more that are widely applicable to your personal life and career, and of course, marketing. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Erik Johnson. High level, background on you. I'll do an intro for you so you don't have to describe your career to this point, but you're all about behavioral science. Behavioral science in the dumbest possible definition seems to be about the pursuit of understanding the why that underpins actions and behavior, right? It's sort of the explanatory or mechanistic variables behind it. So what's the why behind your interest in behavioral science? How did you come to this? I don't want to call it an obsession because that has a negative connotation, but how have you centered your career on behavioral science?
That's a really good frame of the question. So I'd say it kind of started, I'd say a lot of it's just general curiosity of just why do people do things that they do? I think that's where it really flows from. I think at the beginning, a lot of it was just looking at my own behaviors and just thinking all right, I know I want to be go to the gym 5 days a week, but I'm only going 2 or 3. Why is that? I'm I know I'm trying to eat vegetables every day, but I'm not doing this. I'm not going to bed early enough. There's just all these things where I'm just all right, there's a clear I say that I want to do these things, I'm just not doing them. So why is that? Right? And obviously behavioral science call that the intention action gap. And I think I started noticing the intention action gap myself a lot. And I was just really curious about that. I was just why are these things I clearly want to do, or at least I say I want to do, that I just don't follow through with? So I was kind of started applying it through my own lens. And then a lot of this curiosity about that sort of extended to everything else. It's why do a lot of people not work out when they say they want to? And why do we, everybody has things that we want to do that we're not doing. And I think as time goes on, it's also something I think it's grown as more of a kind of topic, because over time, the world's gotten a little more it's got a little harder to do the things we generally want to do. I'd say in the last century, we became more sedentary. So, because we started working at offices and knowledge work. So then you had to actually make effort to go exercise. So then it became a thing of just all right, my day-to-day life does not involve exercise. So I have to find a way to go do that. Right. And fast food, less healthy food became a lot more accessible, a lot cheaper. So all right, I'm also not eating as well. I think we've now entered an era where it's our mental capacity is getting more hijacked, where it's I really want to read books. I want to learn. I want to take courses, but I work and then I'm on my phone all the time. I've decided that I'm not doing that. So I think we kind of keep having these big changes in our environment too, that are just make it even harder to do those things we know we want to do. And that's a lot of where kind of the passion came from, was just it's just once you start digging into those questions, it's just kind of endlessly interesting. And the more you kind of understand about people, psychology applies to everything. So work, your personal life, pretty much anything you can think of was if it involves humans, it's going to involve psychology and the dynamics of how we make decisions. So I was kind of starting with my own sort of personal behavioral changes, and then extending that to think through well, how are other people solving these problems? What are things happening? Even at work, why are people doing this thing and not doing this thing? Just kind of extending curiosity to those kind of everything like that.
I have an insane question, and I apologize for asking it this early in the conversation.
No insane questions here.
When you talk about this personal motivation to do more and be a better version of yourself, say go to the gym, you implied that there's environmental forces that may have made that harder to do. And I immediately thought of social media and the dynamics of the ecosystems that we're operating within, and they're being architected by people who understand behavioral science in deep ways. There's often like game theory involved. There's like gamification mechanisms, like casino mechanisms. That documentary, do you remember The Social Dilemma, talked about that? And I can't remember the guy's name, Jared Lanier or something like that, had spoken about how it's so difficult for an individual to sort of fight against that using willpower. So the way I'm seeing this in some sense is it's almost an arms race, a behavioral science arms race, in that you as an individual can like stack up all of this knowledge and like, tactics around habits and the intention goal gap or intention action gap. But you're in a sense in almost an adversarial relationship sometimes with broader environmental components that maybe have different incentives than you do, right?
Totally.
It's Netflix's incentive to make you spend as much time on their platform as possible, but you don't necessarily want to spend as much time as possible on the platform. You maybe want to watch a movie and then go do other things that would enrich your life. Is that a little bit of a dystopian framing, or like how does that make you feel?
You're touching on something that I think about a lot right now. So this is actually a really great question, because I'd love to like dive into this. So like, I think it's like worth like backing up. So I gave the example of like in the last century, we became like more sedentary. So prior to, like maybe early 20th century, late 19th century, it's like you probably worked like on a farm. You're probably doing like physical labor all day is like your job. And even if you didn't have a job, you sort of like physically do things on the farm. You had to make your own food. You had to like manage your own house. You had all these kind of things. So your life involved a lot of like moving. Even when we started like industrializing, people still generally lived in like denser areas where they did a lot of walking. There wasn't as much like transportation or like driving, things like that. Over time, by the time you're like, the mid, 20th century, pretty much everybody's driving, in the US at least, everybody's driving everywhere, and they're sitting at a desk all day. So all the like natural movement to our day has been kind of like eliminated to the point where like, all right, now we're like sedentary. Combining that with like easy access to food, you can see the charts like of like people, obesity's become a much bigger problem because people aren't moving, and it takes intention to like move and exercise. It's not a natural part of your day. It also takes intention to like eat healthy, because the easiest thing to eat at any given time, and most likely the cheapest, is something that's unhealthy. So I think what we were talking about is like, I think we've hit, and this is a hypothesis I'm trying to kind of form, but I think we've hit a similar kind of inflection point in like society with like technology and social media, where like mentally, I think the things that we like want to do from a mental standpoint are sort of hijacked all the time by like these distractions. And like you said, these like very well optimized, like A/B tested, like social media apps, streaming apps, things like that. They just constantly like entertain us. And literally, even for like 5 seconds that we're bored sitting for a doctor's appointment, we can find something to just be like novel and somewhat like entertaining. And the trade-off of that is that, we don't read as many books as we used to. Like I used to read a lot of books. I realized the last few years, like I'm just like barely reading anymore. So like I figure, why is that? Like, why am I not like doing that as much? So I think we're in kind of a similar era there, where it's like you want to learn something, you want to like deeply focus on something, you want to like watch an hour and a half movie and not like have to pause and rewind, like, wait, what did they say? Because you're busy looking at your phone. It's just like so hard to sit and like absorb things. And I think it's just like generally, we're still learning a lot about this, but I think this is generally probably not good for us. I think focusing is good. Like giving all your attention to like a good piece, like a good novel, I think is probably healthy. I think getting information by reading is probably healthier than getting it in like a 30-second TikTok or something like that. So there's all these kind of like implications of that and how that could impact us. And I think another part I think is interesting to your point is that, I think that like the concept of doing stuff like A/B testing or like measuring is like, hey, we're valuing people's revealed preferences, saying like, oh, they click on these things. So like if we test these and they click this, like, hey, they may say they don't want to, there's also, you can flip that intention and actually got the other way. You're like, yeah, people say they want to read books, but they really just want to mess around on social media all day, what they want to do. And that's true to like some extent, but also when these things are so hyper optimized, it's like if you were forced to live in a casino, like you would probably gamble more, and you would probably be a lot more likely to develop a gambling problem if you're forced to live there. Right now, we're all sort of forced to live in this like entertainment casino where there's just constant things that are perfectly designed for, to trick our brain to like do more and more. And like, like they use the same things casinos do, like variable rewards is like exactly what slot machines do, where they're so like addicting because we never know what's coming next. And social media is the same way, where it's constantly doing these things that's very novel and interesting. So, I think we're in a way where it's like, Yeah, everything's so well optimized against our own like intentions that, I think in some reason that's probably why maybe people feel a little more like, I don't know, there certainly seems to be like a worse mood in the last 10 years. I think a lot of it is just like, we're sort of realizing it's like, man, it's just really hard to do the things I know are like good for me or like enriching. It's very easy just to do like low calorie food and low calorie information in a lot of those ways too.
What are the the mechanisms that lead to this? Because I think if you ask the average person on the street, like I was just out in Manhattan, and New York is, in my opinion, one of the most archaic cities, in that it still has some sense of community and people do go out and socialize and have this like in real life
have to, yeah,
life, but still you look around and everybody's on their phone on the subways, and everybody's like, I had a guy stop on the stairs in a subway because he was on his phone, and they're like, you can't do that. But I think if you ask like most people, they would say they don't want to spend as much time as they do on say social media, right? Like I would think that's a relatively common attitude. Like the what they do versus what they say is going to be different there. So why are these platforms so commanding of our attention? What are the underlying mechanisms? It seems to me that the friction is very low.
Yeah.
And that you said there's variable rewards, right? Like there's kind of a casino mechanism. But why are we so pulled against our presumed intentions?
So I think there's like two angles to it. There's two, like the design of like, all the apps and stuff that we're using. And that's, to your point, like, number one, it is like, there's like basically no barrier to entry. It's just like your phone's right there in 5 seconds, the second you feel like a tinge of boredom. So like, and like habit design, they call these like triggers. Like trigger is something that like initiates a behavior or initiates like a habit. And social media, I think, is like especially addicting because it's like very much tied to like emotional triggers. It's like, I'm bored, I'm going to look up my phone and like find something interesting, right? And we get bored. There's a lot of times during our day where we are going to be bored. It's probably healthy for us to be bored at some point. But the thing is, as soon as like, you're on the train, you're waiting for a doctor's appointment, or even you're watching a TV show and it's just like the exciting part's done. Now they're talking. It's like, all right, I'm going to look at my phone because this isn't exciting enough. So I think it's just like a natural urge to always like look for something a little more interesting. We've just never had something that's so easily accessible and like presses those buttons like so effectively. And to your point too, I mean, these things are very well tested and optimized. Like, some of the best like social scientists in the world have been like experimenting on these platforms for kind of like decades now to see like what makes people click, what makes people do all these kinds of things. So it's really like kind of an unfair fight, I would say. And that doesn't get to the other side. There's also like the personal behavioral change side, where I think in general, and this is part of the reason I kind of get interested in this kind of stuff, is I don't think most of us have a good like framework in our head of like how to change ourselves or change like our actions that we're doing. Because the thing we always default to, like pretty much every person defaults to, is, I just need to like try harder. I seem to like say I'm going to do this thing and I need to try harder to not do that. So it's like, all right, I'm on my phone too much. So like, I'm going to go on my phone less today. And that's kind of all where we stop at. And that's not specific enough. It doesn't really alter the environment. It doesn't really get rid of the distractions. Then we find, all right, nothing's really changed. Like, why have I not done that? Right.
Yeah. Like I'm going to quit drinking, but I'm going to keep all the booze in my cabinet, or I'm going to lose weight, but I'm going to have like Oreos on the counter. And you're like, how is that going to work out?
Yeah.
It just seems too easy to like succumb once you're in one of those
for sure
evolutionary moods, boredom or whatever you had mentioned before. And it's just, you can succumb very easily at that point.
Yeah, we just don't we're not like taught this, there's not like a core way to do it. And that's also not a perfect way of doing it. This is somewhat of an inexact science, but it's just like an unnatural way to look at things. And even when I would like, work with clients in business and stuff, there's just like, it's surprising how often I'm like, all right, what's like the behavior we're trying to drive here? And it's like, oh, I don't know. Like, it seems so obvious. Like, you're trying to get people to do something. Like, people giving you money is behavior. Like, what is it that you're offering? And like, what's the thing they do to like give you that money, right? So we just lack a good frame of reference for that, because we think like, some of it's just like, there's some kind of like bias in thinking that like, in some ways, I think we think willpower is like more noble, where it's like, oh, I just need to try harder. It's a personal failing. I think it's especially, probably like Western, more individualist societies, where it's like, all right, this is my fault. I need to just like work harder. But the thing is with behavioral change is like, actually behavioral change happens when you work less hard. Like, you should actually make it easier for yourself. And that could be as simple as just like, I'm deleting these phones on these apps from my phone, or I'm blocking them with an app like for parts of the day. So I just can't even do it. I just like take away that option when I don't need it. Or like you said with food, it's like, I'm not going to have unhealthy food in my house, or I'm only going to buy stuff on the weekend when I'm having like a cheat day, and then I'm going to get rid of it after that. Those are things that like ultimately require, like, you basically make like small upfront decisions that make it easier to like do what you want to do in the long run. But for some reason, I don't quite know why. I've been doing this for a while, and I'm not sure what the like bias is, but it's just not like a natural way to think for some reason. I think we're just like kind of not well in tune to our own psychology and the psychology of other people. And it's just like hard for us to like step back and think through things that way. And we just kind of think, oh, and I should just set a goal and just be able to like do it. But it's just really not that simple. The other part of that too is like you're probably not going to get it right the first time. Like the thing that you think is going to work to exercise more, the first time you try is probably not going to work. So the thing is we get say like, all right, I'm just not good at this. We get down on ourselves and we like kind of give up. But it's like you probably just need to keep like trying something. It could take years to figure out the right thing that works for you, right? So there's kind of lack of like a framework. That's kind of when I do writing and work and stuff. Like I like to try to like get people thinking a different way of thinking about our actions of ourselves and of other people.
One thing that I think is difficult is the sense of perceived sacrifice or real sacrifice and behavior change. And in, let's say, like dieting, that's a little bit more individual, like single player, but still you have things like maybe going out for dinner with friends that, you know, you have to think about how you're going to alter your behavior in those settings, or like reducing your drinking could be the same thing. But in these more architected systems like social media, I would think, like, let's say I wanted to get rid of Instagram. I'm like, well, how am I going to communicate with these friends that I have overseas who I send memes to? You know, and it's right. Like I can immediately feel that loss.
You do kind of need them at some point, yeah.
Yeah. So there's something that I'm embedded in the system because others are too. So there's a little bit of a network effect. And
for sure,
I think you're a Derek Thompson fan, right? The Atlantic writer.
Love DT.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites, and he covers a lot of this kind of like sociology and like kind of loneliness epidemic and whatnot. And I read this essay that he wrote about the loneliness epidemic, and I can't remember who he had quoted, but they said it's not a loneliness epidemic. It's like being lonely, feeling lonely is actually a very natural, like evolutionary thing. And it usually impels you to go seek social connection. And to your point, this is where, you know, apps step in, or your television, or some, you know, approximation of what social life would be. So it fills you on a very surface level extent. You're still like longing on a deeper level, but it gives you enough to kind of like sit in your apartment, right? But I think there's this whole contingency, and you're seeing it in the data with like people ditching dating apps. But then there's the sense that like, all right, but if everybody else is using them and nobody else is out and about, like if I'm not there, then I'm giving up the potential to meet people in the place that everybody's hanging out, which is suboptimal from my standpoint, if I want to get out into the real world, right? So what I'm saying is like, if everybody else is involved, it's not just a you versus your habits. It's also like you and everybody else who is involved in the system too.
Yeah, and that does make it tricky. I mean, like I said, the network effects of these things are huge. Like you can't really live life like offline. Like you can't be like fully offline anymore. Like there's just, again, it is useful like keep in touch with people. And it's usual like stuff like Twitter and Reddit is like genuinely useful for like learning from interesting people, or like finding stuff I probably wouldn't find anywhere else. It's not useful when I'm on there for like 6 hours a day, but you know, if for parts of the day, you know, it is super useful to like check those things out. So that is a challenge. I think, you know, a lot of this comes down to, you got to figure, every individual person needs to kind of figure out like, what's the value I'm really getting out of this, that, you know, that does like generally feel like when do I feel satisfied when I use these things? I feel like satisfaction is kind of an underrated, like, you know, metric. It's just like, all right, I checked Reddit for a few minutes and like, oh, I'm satisfied. I read some interesting things, but I didn't spend too long on that. So like same thing with like Instagram, Facebook, whatever that is. Like what is it that makes it useful? Then how can you like arrange it so you kind of only use it in those like ways that are satisfying? Like a lot of those, like I have apps that just like block, you know, distracting websites and things like that for most of the day. So I just can't get like, again, as soon as you have that little twinge of like boredom or like, oh, I'm stuck on something, I'll just like, look at this. Like that's what you want to try to avoid, is just the like unplanned. I think it's another part of it too. It's like you want to set your own intentions and like follow through on those, figure out how to do it. The problem is like, this is not super simple right now. Like, you know, these apps really will do that for you because that doesn't align with their own incentives. Like they want you to spend more time on those things. So you kind of got to like hack things together yourself. So, you know, there's more and more solutions coming out for that. You know, honestly, at some point, I think the only way to really solve this is probably some sort of regulation. Because I really think apps should apps like this should be more required to like let you set your own kind of settings. Like, here's what I want to see. Here's how often I want to be on there, and be like alerted of like, oh, you've been scrolling for 20 minutes. Do you want to keep going? Like, that'd be kind of helpful to just like, because you kind of get in the zone and lose track of time. It's, oh wait, it's been 20 minutes. Like, wow, I should like stop that, you know? So I think there's a lot of things that like could be done. It's just like, I don't know what the inflection point is where there's like a market demand to do those kind of things, or policy that enforces that, or there's just like enough personal tools to use that you can make it work for yourself. But you know, a lot of it is like, all right, how much time do I want to spend on these, and what are the tasks that are useful? But again, that takes work. Like, we're all busy. We have a lot of things like going on. You have to like, that takes work to like sit and do. So it's not like a trivial thing to sit and think through when you've got so many other things going on.
Are there, you mentioned a little bit of this with the apps that block distracting websites, but is there like a case or like a practical example of how you've implemented, behavioral science principles in your own personal life or career?
Yeah, I can think of a lot of examples. So it's kind of like, people always ask like, you know, how do you use it yourself? I think I can think of a lot of like good examples, you know, of how I've like used it to work. But I can also think of a lot of bad examples where I'm still like just as susceptible. So like, just because you like understand the biases of our mind and stuff like that, it doesn't mean you're less susceptible. It makes you like a little bit more aware, and it helps you like work around things. But you're also like, I think it's just like, oh, you're a behavioral science person. Like, you must be like, just like have the perfect days and everything. It's like, that is extremely not true. But I do have ways that I've been able to work on.
Didn't Kahneman say something like that when asked, like, about like, if it, you know, helps it? He's like, not really. Like, it's like, now I know like the behavior that I'm engaging in, but it doesn't stop me from it.
Yeah. I don't remember the exact quote, but I think it's like, now I'm just like more aware of like why I'm failing at things that I want to do, you know? Yeah, I mean, some examples. So like on the, you know, something I've been working on a lot lately is like being on my phone, like just looking at my phone, being on social media, things like that. I think I'm definitely like a more susceptible person, where it's just like, it is very satisfying to just kind of scroll, like read random things, especially if it's something like a Reddit or Twitter where there's like some interesting things I'm like learning. It almost feels like productive, and I find that like very like addicting. Also, like, I'm like a sports fan, and it is fun to like watch a game and just like watch like the commentary come in and like whatever. So like those things that are like useful. But again, it's also just a super easy default to whenever. Again, it's like the problem with social media is like the unexpected usage. So it's like, I'm bored for a second, I'm going to go on this, or like, oh, I'm stuck on something with work, I'm going to take a break and go on this, and then it turns into like more time than you want. So myself, like, you know, what I try doing with that is, like I said, I use an app called Freedom that like, it's like a VPN that just like blocks access to websites and apps on your phone. And for like most of the work days, I just set to these like little time blocks when I can like go on. And it's interesting is when you get in that flow of like not checking those things, you kind of forget about it throughout the day. And you're like, oh, well, I didn't really like need that as much. And it's like, the more you do it, the more like, reinforcing it is to think like, oh yeah, it's good to not do this. You know,
there's almost this hump that you have to get over when you're entering a focus state. But once you pass that little discomfort moment,
exactly,
it's not a problem. It's just that one moment, like you had talked about, when you're first bored, or you're first hungry, or you're first sad, and like, if you just sit with it and like kind of push through, you can kind of get to the point where your behaviors are aligned with your intentions. But if you don't notice that moment, or I mean, you're blocking that moment, right? Like, so it's an actual environmental impediment to taking the distraction. But once you push through, in my experience, then you're past it, you know?
Yeah. And that's like the hardest part, right? Like, actually, I remember like years and years ago, I remember listening to an interview with like Aziz Ansari talking about this, because he's like, you know, he's a creative. He has to write stand-up comedy. He has to write scripts, like things like that. And he's like, this is like, I know this is probably like late 2010s or something, where like this stuff is really picking up. He's like, it's it's impossible for me to sit and like work through this stuff with my phone by me. Because again, the second when you're doing something creative or challenging, you're going to hit those walls where it's like, oh, how do I figure this out? And that's when it's like super easy, just like, all right, now I'm going to look at my phone and take a break. But that doesn't actually help you like solve the problem. Like the breakthroughs come when you just sit in that kind of discomfort for a little bit. And I think the same thing with like, you know, I'm a big like movie person, and like I like going to the movies and not watching movies at home, because again, it's like, it's super easy to just get distracted by my phone. And the thing is, when you're watching like a movie, especially if it's maybe more like conversation driven, is like, you're going to pull out your phone when it's like, it's slightly boring. But the boring parts are like often very important for plot development. Like what some people are saying are extremely important for like the point of the story. So it's because it's like quote unquote boring, like you don't want to miss that. And like, so I think like those are the important points that you do need to push through. And that's where I think the biggest thing is just remove the distraction and just know the times. And I try to set like predetermined times, but you can also say like, hey, I know I'm going to go to the coffee shop, work on this thing. I'm turning on this blocker, or I'm leaving my phone, you know, decide on times when like we want that accessible and when we don't. You can also think about like reinforcing the habits, just like, basic habit design of just like, all right, when I get replacing the habit basically. So like, all right, when I get that temptation, when I look at my phone, what does I really want to do? What can I do instead? So, if that's when you're trying to work, you can think of like, all right, well, I'm going to go like look at an email or something that's less like, distracting. That's like, all right, how do I kind of like scratch that itch to some extent? Something I've been doing is like, I had a kid, a baby last year. And like part of like when you have a kid, you start like kind of observing yourself more, and you're just like, I know there's like soaking everything in that I'm doing, and I don't want to be soaking like me like being on my phone all the time and just like staring and scrolling at this piece of device. So like I was like, all right, like we're probably gonna hanging out, and I'm probably gonna like have times where she's kind of chilling. Like I just want to flip through something. So I started getting magazine subscriptions again because I was like, I think there are times like it's hard to read a book when I'm around her because like I don't know, if she changes what she wants to do all the time. It's hard to like get in the flow of a book. But something like a magazine is great because I can just like read a little bit, put it down, whatever. I'm still kind of like getting that mental engagement that I'm looking for, but I'm not, looking at the same thing all the time. And I'm not like, going through the scrolling and stuff that gets like so easy to get like locked into, for example. So I think a lot of it is like, how do you like change the situation where you kind of remove that or at least like put some friction in the way of what the temptation is? And also think about how do you replace that urge? I think this is another like error that happens on behavioral change is like, you're trying to satisfy some need and you're probably just satisfying it in a way that isn't working for you. You often kind of need to figure out what that way is. I mean, if like health, for example, it's like, I don't want to eat ice cream every day. That wouldn't be healthy. But like I do like sweets a little bit. So like just having like good fruit around kind of scratch that itch without being like too healthy. So you got to think of how you're going to like meet that need as well.
There is something really interesting that you noted about having a baby and like being reflective of your own behavior, which I don't have a baby yet, but I do notice when I go work in a co-working space or in a coffee shop that I'm much less likely to distract myself. And I'm sure that nobody is paying attention to me. But in my head, I'm like, if I just spend my time here on Reddit, I'm going to look like such a dumbass. Like I'm going to feel like a dumbass.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I just talked to
totally.
A friend of mine, again, over in Manhattan, and we were talking about TikTok, and she's a big TikTok fan. And I never went down the rabbit hole there. I tried it and I didn't like it. It didn't capture my addictive tendencies like Twitter or Instagram have.
It's interesting because I'm the same way where like I think video is just not as inherently like addictive to watching videos feels like work, but like reading text, I'll just like go forever.
I think you and I are the same with like the Twitter kind of stuff.
I think everyone's just like wired a little different. We might be the last generation wired that differently, but it seems like everyone else is the other way.
But she mentioned though, she's like, I don't have a problem with it at all during the workday because she goes to an office, and I presume that's why. And then she's like, at night, that's when I go down these vortexes where I just get sucked in and I spend, an hour or more looking at TikTok. And I have to assume that being in office gives you some sense of that accountability, or at least perceived like, oh, I should be doing productive work in this environment because others around me may notice that I'm not.
Yeah, I think there's like a few parts to that. I think, one is just like there are other people around, and it's like, all right, I don't want to be the guy. Other people are doing productive things. I don't want to be the guy that's wasting time. And there's also like when you go to an office or go to a coffee shop, like you kind of have an intention in that space of like, I'm here to do work. So it's a little hard to be like, all right, I'm this is a complete waste of time if I just don't do the work I'm supposed to do. It's like going like the gym. It's like going to the gym and just like sitting on your phone. It's like, why did I come to the gym if I was just going to do this? Like I need to like, do my exercise. It's like there's some like intention aspect too.
Well, that's kind of interesting because then when you think about behavioral change, like you're thinking of it in terms of like the threshold moment and not the entirety, not the gestalt of the behavioral change that you want to enact. But like if you can simply set up systems to trick yourself into going to the gym or trick yourself into systems where you enter an office, then the rest may follow in a less frictionful way. Right. Yeah. So like then it becomes less about like
getting started is the hardest part for a lot of things.
Yeah. Like getting that first action step that everything else follows from, that seems like the focal point of maybe behavioral change, as opposed to saying like, I'm going to work out for an hour 6 times a week. Like that seems like impossible, but you're like, oh, I'm just going to enter the gym like 3 times a week or something like that.
Again, this is a very like key part of behavior change. I think this is another thing that just like feels ineffective to us intuitively, where we're just like, yeah, it's not worth like, because there's guy BJ Fogg out of like Stanford, and he has this concept of like tiny habits that you always want to start with like this. You're trying to build towards something, you need to start with like the smallest possible So example he gives is like, I want to floss more. So like every night I'm going to floss one tooth. And then I'm like, success, I did it. And then you'll often end up doing some more, but you're like you're not setting an initial threshold that feels like overwhelming. And it can feel very silly sometimes, but exercise is a great one where it's like, we just default to like, all right, there's this weird bias. And again, this is another one where I don't know if I have a good name for it, but there's kind of this like go big or go home, where we're like, it's only worth me running if I run 50 miles a week. Everything out, but like, there's a huge difference between 0 and like 50. It's like, what if I ran like a mile every day? Like that's better than 0, or I walked a mile every day. That's better than 0, even if it's not like optimal. It's better to start like, what's that like lowest threshold that's like easy to get, that feels like effortless, and then like build on that. That's another example of something I've been doing again with like a young kid. Gym time, and like time is just a lot more like precious, and you're tired and stuff. That's something to like keep my workouts going. It's like, I don't try to work out every day. It's like, I want to go 3 times a week and get my basic lifts in, and then, whatever. But a lot of weeks when I'm like really tired, I'm just like, I don't know if I want to go. I'm just like, all right, I'm going to go and like just do squats, do bench press. And I'm like, if I do that one thing and I still don't feel like being there, I'm just going to go home and I'm going to call it good. And I'll usually end up getting at least 1 or 2 other things in. I'll do a little bit more. But at least like, you have to give yourself permission to just like get what works for you at times too. And again, it's like this remembering that something is better than nothing is kind of an important concept that's just, again, for whatever reason, like not as intuitive.
It's really funny because the times that I do that I tell myself I'm just going to go in and do the bare minimum, I often end up having the best workouts or the best work sessions.
It feels good because you're like, I did it when I didn't want to. Like that's super reinforcing for like habits. It feels very rewarding, right? But that's also why you got to set that low threshold. You're like, hey, I achieved what I set out to do, right? Mm-hmm. And then you did more than that. And you're like, that feels like even better.
We're speaking about behavioral science, and I think a little bit of a scary way, in that it seems like there's these forces beyond our control that are architecting our decisions in a way that aligns with their incentives and not ours. But I have to assume that there's a benevolent way to use these principles as a business owner, a leader, or a marketer, right? There has to be
100%.
Some pro-social incentive aligned way to enact these things, or is this all just like
totally
dark patterns and manipulation?
So I'll offer, and maybe somewhat more optimistic, is that there's no evil person pulling the strings behind to say like, we want people to like work out less or do all these things. Like what actually I think is what leads to most of this is just not thinking about the consequences, or like not thinking intentionally about the design of what we're doing. There's kind of like a criticism that people say when like you come in and do behavioral science, like, oh, you're trying to manipulate people. You're trying to like design these environments. You're trying to like nudge them to do something. And I mean, that is important. Like, I think in this kind of work, like ethics is super, super important. You have to be really clear and really aligned on like what people want to do. Like I always try to like, when I'm working with companies and things, it's like, all right, what's your goal and what's your customer's goal? Like, how do we like align those and keep those like in a way? Because you can't just trick people to do something, expect things to work for a long time. But what happens a lot of times, we just never actually think about it. So just because you're not trying to nudge someone in a direction doesn't mean that not trying doesn't nudge them to something else. Because like every design and every system is going to promote a behavior.
So there's no neutral.
Whether you want it to or not. There's no neutral, right? So like a lot of these things are just a result of just not really thinking through it. Just like, all right, we're just going to make this in the most neutral way possible, and then not really measuring what happens, right? Or not thinking about that. So that's where I think being like half of the games is being like intentional. And I think when you just putting some thought into how you're can be intentional about these things, can make a really big difference. I think in perspective of like, if you're a business owner, working in business things, one of these things, if you are like a manager or like a business owner and you're managing people, for example, like really look at like the work environment and say like, again, it's like, am I facilitating the like type of work I want people to do? Like, are people able to do the type of work they want to do? Or are they in meetings all day? Are they getting like chats and Slacks like constantly? Like, is it important for people to be able to do focused work, or is it important to do like calls? Like, and all right, how do we like align those incentives, right? Again, most of these things like don't happen because we're just not like intentional or like think about it, right? I think the same thing goes, you're thinking about like your customers, especially when it comes to like marketing and product design and things like that. Is like, all right, what problem are people trying to solve? How do we design this so they like solve that problem and solve it in a way that they're willing to pay us for the service or something like that? Mm-hmm. Again, like again, people can get uncomfortable about this stuff, but again, there's no neutral. Like, so people are going to be nudged one way or the other. So how do you do it in a way that like aligns all those incentives and creates like a big believer? I think there's more win-wins than we think about. It's like when it comes to like business, it's like you provide a service that solves a problem. People pay to like solve that problem. So, how do you like solve that problem in a way and solve a problem they actually want to solve rather than solve problems like you're trying to solve as well. Keep those aligned.
I think that there can be a backfire effect for long-term engagement and in the business context for brand as well. Like you can trick somebody in the short term, and unless you have truly like predatory, like monopolized, like value capture mechanism where you just lock somebody in, which is like, it doesn't exist in too many industries. I think people will get tricked, but then they'll feel burned. And it maybe isn't like exactly after the moment that they're tricked. Maybe it's a little ways down the line. Like I remember there was a lot of controversy around it. I believe it was New York Times would kind of trap people into their subscriptions and make them call. And
they're really hard to unsubscribe.
Yeah, it was like you had to go through a million hoops to jump through to unsubscribe. But to subscribe was incredibly frictionless, right? But there was backlash on that. And like obviously, like I've got the conversion optimization background as do you. And I think what you learn really quickly is you can trick somebody through dark patterns or through urgency or whatever these mechanisms are that cause somebody to make a fast decision, but it tends not to work out over the long run. It tends not to accrete value over the long run. And I see that in social. A lot of people who are very good at garnering attention tend to, spike and fizzle out pretty quickly in terms of their long-term resonance and brand building.
Yeah.
And then I just, again, this conversation I had earlier, the woman told me that she got an email from a brand and it had some salacious headline, something attention grabbing and anxiety inducing, something like security alert or something like that. But then it was an email that said like, you're spending too much money on your whatever, like, sign up with us to like save money. And it was a marketing email. It wasn't like a actual security thing, but she was, her reaction was like, fuck this brand. Like it was not like,
right.
Like their open rate was probably incredible, but
yeah,
for what purpose, for what end? So it seems like it's maybe short-term thinking to pull some of those strings too, obviously.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think it's hard to measure like what that, and every product's a little bit different, but if people feel like you're screwing them over or you're like, constantly trying to like upsell them or whatever, or you're going to be on, then they're not going to be loyal. Like maybe they'll stick with you for a long time because they just don't have good alternatives. The switching costs are high. As soon as the switching costs are like relatively available, like somebody can scoop you in. So, I do think that's an underrated part of like value is just like customer satisfaction. And I think it's like getting so much worse because like so much customer support is like automated now. You either just can't talk to a person or, just they're trying to use like AI stuff now. And it's like, it's so relieving when you talk to like a person. You're just like, please just like solve my problem, So I think that is a really good point. I like the example you gave on like that marketing email. Because that's one when I've done like trainings with marketing teams on things like that. A lot of times I talk about, I was like, all right, let's figure out like what's the behavior we're trying to drive and what's the like metric there. And a lot of times like people, largely because of just incentives that are given them from like their managers or whatever, they get really hyper focused on one point of the chain without thinking of like the next part of it. So like email marketing is a good example. I tell people it's like, all right, if your goal is to like do more open rates, just do a subject line that says free money. And like people are going to click that and your open rates are going to go up. No one's going to buy anything more because they're going to be like, oh, wait, you're not giving me free money. You're actually selling this financial product or something like that. No one's going to buy anything, but your open rates will go up. So you always have to keep in mind that like end behavior. That's why I think like what happens a lot with marketing, just like a lot of just like bigger organizations in general is like people get so hyper focused on their area and we don't really keep that whole experience in mind. Like ultimately the goal is like people sign up for the product, they pay for the product, and then they keep coming back. They keep paying for it because they're having a good experience. I think that last part that people forget a lot is like, yeah, you can really optimize at every one of those points, but like long-term retention is only going to come by like a good product that keeps solving the problem, that they feel like they're being like treated well too. Because otherwise, you can keep people locked in for a long time for a lot of reasons, but you're not going to, I think like customer satisfaction is like a true like moat where people are like, hey, I'm happy to use this. This company seems to get me. You don't have to get all like corny with like corporate value, like, our customers are our family or anything like that. But it's just like, hey, people feel like you're kind of looking out for them and you're not trying to like constantly screw them over and you're solving their problems, then they're probably going to be like pretty loyal, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same way people would act with like friendships or, family members. It's just like, hey, this person's always looking out for me and they're always kind of like doing what you do, then like I want them around,
Yeah. I got to ask you about AI. I've had this very poor experience the last like week or so with Aura Ring, and they're very clearly like
I got my Aura on right now.
Yeah, it's mine's been broken for a week, and I've been dealing with a largely AI system, and I finally broke through to a human. But it took me many days, and it's left a very poor taste in my mouth for the brand. And I have to imagine that's going to happen more frequently. But I want to speak more broadly about AI in maybe a behavioral economic sense or classic economic sense, even in that I think we could probably assume that that AI is reducing the cost and friction of certain things, largely on delivering stock customer support experiences. For, let's say, delivering outbound emails with some base level personalization, and for creating content. And when friction and cost is lowered, we have to assume that supply is going to rise, right? Like there's going to be more supply of that. And my question is, like, as somebody who runs an SEO and content agency, is like how am I adding value to the world, right? Because if I add value to the world and to our clients, then I'm going to extract some value too, and I'm going to grow a business. Like, just, I don't know, call me like a naive capitalist, but it's like the invisible hand at work. Yeah. So like where in this world is value going to accrue, or to, how is that going to reallocate, presuming that, there's going to be a large oversupply of baseline information?
Yeah, it really is a question. I obviously can't pretend I have like the answers, because it's, a very new future ahead. But I think I probably have some like maybe slightly contrarian thoughts about this coming from a behavioral science perspective. There's a few things. I think, like, for one, I think we underrate how much people want human connection in like the things that they do. So there's this book, there's this concept, it's called the doorman fallacy. I think Rory Sutherland introduced me to this, where it's like an engineer would look at a hotel, like a Four Seasons, and people walk into a hotel, there's a guy at the door, like, welcome to the hotel, he opens the door for you. If you look at a pure like engineering mindset, you'd say like there's no point in the doorman there. They can open their own door. We can like cut costs on like labor, wherever these things. But the reason people go to places like the Four Seasons is because there's tons of staff and everything is personal, and there's always someone there to like answer their questions or like solve their problems. And there's a personal touch to everything. I think I think that speaks to like there's a little bit of a bias where I think we assume stuff that has like more people involved that's like it is nicer. Like luxury goods, luxury services are assumed with like more labor than less. Like you go to the store, there's tons of people there to help you. There's like always somebody you can talk to. So the reason you're paying a lot for those is not just because the beds are nicer. You're paying because there's an experience that they're providing. I think it's really hard to like provide a premium experience like that with like just automating everything to computers. And who knows where things are at in the future, but I think we're always going to want other people. Like, to me, like one thing that's ever going to go away is sales. Like, I know I grew up around like in the Midwest, a lot of people working like sales jobs and stuff. And I feel like when I talk to my friends, like, more engineering focused, live on the coast, they like really just like don't understand like sales as much. And it's like, the whole point is like, yeah, you can make stuff, but you need like really strong relationships. And a lot of our relationships, a lot of our even like business relationships are more business transactions are more relationship driven than we think they are, because we always want somebody to feel like we can like trust. So I think there's a level of like, my kind of general thought is a lot of stuff on the lower end is going to be fully automated in AI. Just like how like things are, it's like, all right, if I go to CVS, like I want to do just a self-checkout. I just kind of want to get in and out. If I go to like a nice grocery store, like even like a Whole Foods or something, it feels a little tacky to have like self-checkout to me. So it's like, this is supposed to be like a nicer place. It's not really like nice stuff is not all about like pure efficiency, right? I think like art's a good example of that too, where it's like, this is like the other point of that too, is I also just think that it gets the other side of like the point I was making. I also think that there's always like, we don't fully understand how our mind works. We can't really articulate like taste, like, and what takes off, what works and doesn't. Like humans are just not like a math problem. And that makes stuff like behavioral science a little challenging, because you don't have these like rock solid, like replicable studies all the time, because people are just too like variable. But that also means I think it's just gonna be hard to like really define, AI know exactly what we want. I think it was especially in terms of content or in terms of like art, for example. It's like, there's going to be AI movies. There's going to be like AI content agencies. There's going to be AI music. It'll be out there. It'll be prevalent. Like Spotify is already like, I was read this article like a month or so ago, but like Spotify's dropping in these like AI made like, when you go on those like, focus mode playlists and stuff, they're dropping a lot of like AI stuff in there. And again, that's like made to be like background music. Like Netflix makes a lot of movies that are kind of made to be in like the background. Stuff like that just like we're not really expecting too much from, or that's supposed to be a quick transaction. I think will become more and more automated, that like lower end. But I think I almost like have a like theory where I think that the higher end is actually going to be more people intensive, because people are going to be looking for more human experiences, human connection. Because I mean, you can already see like people are just more stressed, anxious than before, because like you pointed out, like Derek Thompson article, we just have more solitude because we just don't have as many. We're at home a lot more often. We do things a lot more online. I think that's part of like what's driving some of that, is like we just don't have all these like, I think these like random interactions we have through the day are kind of like underrated for our happiness. It's just like nice to say hi to somebody in a store, like chit chat with your Uber driver is like kind of nice sometimes. Like these are just like little human interactions we start like missing. I think like the higher end, that's going to be a premium, is that's like, no, I want a person driving me there. I want like a person greeting me at the door. Like, I feel like that's probably going to become more of like a premium service in a lot of ways.
That reminds me of that. There's some Kurt Vonnegut quote about like, I think his like wife asked why he goes to the post office, and he's a rich man, he can afford to, and he's like, oh, because I see like a cat, and I pet the cat, and I like, oh, and then I see a neighbor, and I found the quote here, and he's like, we love to move around. It's like we're not supposed to dance at all anymore. We're here on Earth to fart around. Right. But I always love that quote.
I mean, think about like the classic like old guys hanging at the coffee shop, like reading the newspaper and chatting together. It's just like,
it's Lindy.
They can talk on the phone, but like, yeah, we're always going to want those little community things. And I like feel like we're going to like swing back in some ways.
I've been thinking about it from the content perspective. And when I say content, I mean that in a very broad sense. I don't mean that like a blog post or like a video. I mean, it could include any of those things, but something created in order to be consumed primarily from, say, like a business perspective. But I'm wondering, like, I think, like, to your point, like a lot of the low level stuff can and probably will and probably should be automated and like frictionless. So like in maybe grabbing a definition of you wrote about like the labor illusion. And if I wanted to just get a quick definition of the labor illusion, then I would hopefully be able to just get that instantly. But to have it contextualized by you, who has a background in behavioral science and who can apply that in different contexts and scenarios, specifically to something that's happening today, which you had mentioned about DeepSeek in your newsletter, that to me is more valuable now than it used to be. So I mean, this is optimistic as hell, but I think that it's going to increase the value of certain aspects, certain dimensions of content, specifically like proprietary and unique data, perspective and taste, personality, and then credibility and kind of authority or expertise in a given field. I think those things are actually going to be priced at a premium.
Yeah.
Because the rest of it's like, it's giving people a taste of content, per se, and giving the ubiquity of like low level content. And I think what that does is like how Starbucks came out and it didn't kill craft coffee. Actually, it made craft coffee possible, because then everybody's like, oh, I don't have to just get Folgers at home. Like I can go out and get like an Arabica from Ethiopia. And well, now I have a taste for this. Like
of all the problems of the era, I'm very happy to live in an era of like massively available, widely available good coffee.
Absolutely. Sure. And I don't know, maybe it's like an optimistic take, but I think that may happen with our information ecosystem, because there's
I totally agree.
Functionally going to be things that like AI can't or just isn't going to be as good at. Like, I don't know what 20 years from now it's going to do, but like in the next few, like I can't imagine that it's going to be able to generate it can't generate data from thin air, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what my thought is. I think you'd even look at like, most history of media, and like there's always a little, like think of like the New Yorker, for example. Like New Yorker is like pretty bare bones. It's they have very little of like a digital footprint. They're not very like online. The New Yorker's never been and never will be like a mass consumed like publication, but it has a very dedicated audience that pays a lot of money to read it. And they're very influential, like people that tend to, or like more educated, more like influential, tend to like consume that kind of information. I think content's gonna be the exact same way, where it's like it's premium stuff is gonna be really good, and like there's gonna be a higher premium on taste and like true like expertise to like give that human lens on things. There was a really good interview Ben Affleck in the last month or two, I remember, because he was talking about this in like film, and he was kind of making the point that I was making, where like all the lower level stuff will become automated. He's like, but like taste is going to become even more of a premium, because like what makes like, look at like some of the greatest movies of all time. It's like, you can never have an algorithm like determine exactly what's going to work. It's like very hard to define what it is that makes them so good, because they are very like human. Like art, especially, is inherently like human. Like it's what no other animals have art the same way we do, right? And it's very hard to measure that like emotional connection of things and how those kind of work. So I think like the premium on people that have that taste and will put in more of the effort, like you mentioned, labor illusion. I think that's going to be a big part where it's like, hey, we have real people spending time doing this. And I think there is going to be a premium on that. Again, I think the audiences might get a little smaller, but yeah.
Yeah. Can you define the labor illusion real quick?
Yeah.
Because I think I passed over that a little bit high level.
Yeah. So labor illusion is this concept where like we like to see the work behind something. We value a service or product more when we see the work that goes into it. So classic example, they ran the study of like flight aggregators like Kayak or like Google Flights, where if you like click search and then there's just a search bar, it's just searching, and then it just pops up. Versus another version, this is actually like an A/B test they ran. There's another version where it's like populating, it's like 25% done. Now I found 50 flights. Now I found 100 flights, and they're populating as it comes up. The latter one, we like trust the results a lot more, and we actually like, even if it takes longer to get the results, we value what they put out more because we feel like we've seen the effort into it. We know it's looking into it. I wrote about recently because DeepSeek has like a similar thing where it walks through its like reasoning. It's like, all right, here's every step of the process, how it's like thinking. And that's really useful because like, number one, it's like, again, the process is sort of like, probably it's somewhat for show because like, all right, we don't know, there's all this like stuff happening in the machine behind us, but it is showing us that there's a process, and also helps us like improve the second query. It's, all right, I've seen how they figured this out. This helps me figure out what I can ask more of, right? So yeah, it's the idea of like knowing there's more work behind something makes us value it more.
That seems extremely germane right now. And I can think of a couple examples just off the top of my head, like LinkedIn comments are being automated with AI. And I think part of the reason people are frustrated at that is because of how obviously low effort it is.
Yeah.
I think like even if you disregarded the comment, which the comments are usually bad, but let's assume that the comment was like decently good.
Yeah.
If you knew that it was just generated via like some API, I would personally feel like it was cheap.
Right.
I'm like, come on, you didn't even read my post. You didn't even take the time to respond to it in your own thoughts. Like it just,
you can't put your own thoughts out.
It feels cheap, right? Like, and it's not like it's not the substance of the thing. It's like how it was created that leads to that feeling of cheapness.
And that's like, to put that, it's not wildly different than people that clearly follow like a template for their post. They're just like, all right, here's like, I'm following a very clear copywriting template. And it's like, it does kind of work to an extent, but it's like, it feels a little hollow because I know you're like, that adds like another step of that where I'm just trying to like automate it and get your attention, but I'm not putting a deep thought into it.
I'm imagining this too in the case of using AI to, pull yourself into real world experiences. Like a lot of people are using it for travel planning, but one could imagine using it for date planning, to construct the perfect date night. And I think if you're quiet about it, it could work relatively well. If you talked about how much time and effort you put into picking this particular restaurant. But I think if the illusion breaks and the person all of a sudden knows that ChatGPT planned the date, I think that the perception of the date goes down, right?
For sure. I think it would even be like, again, it's like, I think these concepts hold even if it's not AI itself. It's like, oh, I had my personal assistant like plan the date for us. Like, then you couldn't put time and effort into like our time together, I think like a lot of those like similar scenarios of a pre-AI would feel like a little off-putting, or to be like way more or so like post-AI too. It's like the same concept. Like there's things that we want your genuine effort to show, right?
I think there's been so many rom-coms, and I can't think of any specific one off the top of my head that have that plot where it's like for some reason the man typically is like faking it in some way, like they've got like a coach, or like they're pretending to be something they're not, and then the woman figures out and it's like, oh fuck, like and it just breaks down.
No, it was me the whole time, but I just had to like for sure.
But it's like you wanted that person. You didn't want like the script or like the template.
There's definitely an AI version of that coming to Netflix probably in the next couple of years, I would say.
Do you think that the way we're going to process and consume information is going to be altered with the rapid proliferation of AI? Like, do you think, speaking not from maybe like the creation standpoint, but from the consumption standpoint, it's going to alter like how we interact with information? And that's a very like complex question, I guess, but
Yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't call myself an AI expert, but like, I think the way I think about it, I think it's probably just going to accelerate the trends that are already happening. We're just like, we have so much content. It's so like rapid fire, like attention is at such a premium. Like, standing out among in the noise is just like harder and harder. And we're just like overwhelmed by options and things that are like in our ear or in our eyes or whatever all the time. I, my main thought is I think that'll just accelerate. And the other part of that too would just be like verification and knowing like where this came from. Is this true? Like, it's probably just going to get like harder, and it's already like hard, like just the way that we consume. So I kind of see it as probably just like another multiplier to kind of what's happening. But I don't. It's hard for me to say without being super familiar with technology, but. It just seems like the next step of where we're already at. It's just, all right, there's more and more stuff. Like, because the barrier, like a lot of where, this environment is like the barrier to entry just keeps decreasing of like creating things, right? Or creating content, creating posts, things like that. It started really simply. It's like, hey, I have a profile and I post some stuff on my friends' walls or whatever. And now it's like, we're all content creators and like, we need to have like a brand or like, and I follow all these other people. Like, it's really like a social media. Like, I feel like for me personally, like, my social media with like my actual friends and family is pretty much all shifted to like group chats.
Mm-hmm.
I just like really don't use this stuff for like, my friends that much because it's just hard to find people on there. So it's like everything else, like Instagram, Facebook are just like not really about your like friends anymore. So like these like things keep changing and there's just more and more, and just that's just going to keep reducing the barriers and make it that much easier and more like automated. And again, that's also why I think, to your point, like if there'll be more of a premium for like higher quality, more intentional stuff. For people that are looking for that kind of thing.
My question is how we signal that, which I guess is like a behavioral science principle, so we can rope that in. But you mentioned, verification of like, where did this info come from? And I think you can see the steady supply and like proliferation of content, lowercase c, from like the olden days where it's like, this is the Bible, like this is the book, right? Like this is the source of truth.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Gutenberg press, and like now all of a sudden other people can publish things, and it's like, all right, how do you like validate that something is trustworthy? And then you get to the point where you can publish things online, and then you've got like bestseller lists, like the New York Times ordains you as a trustworthy source, and like you can kind of go further and further down, and like now you've got platforms like Google will say, all right, this website has a lot of backlinks. It seems to write quality content on this subject. So we're going to rank it higher, and it's going to be more salient for these things because we deem it to be trustworthy. It seems like there's going to be possibly a new emergence of new filtering signals for what to trust, what to allocate your attention to. And I don't know exactly what those things are going to be yet.
Yeah.
I mean, to some sense, you said just like peers, right? Like, it's what are your peers saying?
Totally. Yeah. I think it will evolve. It's hard for me to say what those things will be, but I think it will evolve because like, classic like theory in behavioral economics, we call like dual process theory, where there's like system one and system two modes of thinking. And system one is our like instinctual, like instant, it's like subconscious. We just like see something and, I don't need to think actively about how to brush my teeth. I just do it. And there's system two, which is this more reflective, more concentrated, like deeper thought. We're like analyzing something, we're learning something. And especially in a social media environment, like it's all playing on our system one. And, different people have different levels of like, even like internet literacy to like, it's such a big difference if you're like a millennial who is like most of your life on the internet, but like not necessarily all of it. How you like view information versus like, your boomer parents. Just the type of stuff that like will see and like think is interesting, or like, these fake things they'll fall for. It's just like totally different because they just don't have that like literacy.
So true.
So it's like, I think it's just ultimately to evolve. And like, what are those like little system one signals? And I think the biggest one that social media plays on is like, if one of my friends shares it, then I'm more likely to trust it. Like if I get something recommended to me by someone I trust, then, and that's also what like influencer culture is like all about, is like this podcaster, this TikTok person, like I've watched enough of their stuff. I trust them, and what they send me, I'm just going to like be on board with generally. Right. And those relationships have sort of like changed. Yeah, I think over time we're going to need like more sophisticated ways of doing that. Like I think community notes are like pretty like effective. I think like a better way to like automate that would be good. Because then that at least gives you a pause. I saw this thing like, oh, there's a note here. Let me see like what it says.
Yeah.
So it gives you that system to like reflection and not just like jump into whatever it is. I could see something eventually where like if a video is like AI created, like it's legally required to have like a watermark or something. So it's like, that this is, and that'll obviously, I don't know if we'll like do a policy or how you like, there'll be other ways around that probably, but like, how do I know something is an AI video versus not? Because at some point it's gonna be hard to tell.
Hmm.
And there's going to be little signifiers like that to just like, state where's this coming from, who's kind of like promoting it. And, a lot of it too is like we just need to like wean ourselves more and more off of these like rapid fire platforms too, which genius on the bottle, maybe not, but it's also that's some of this is inherent to the platforms. Or just when you're skimming stuff so fast, it's just like you're not really in the mindset of verification. You're just trying to get like entertained or like, find instant information quickly that you're expecting or something like that.
It seems like it's a very dynamic environment too, and that there's always a little bit of game theory or like cat and mouse and like little loopholes that open up, and then the platforms figure out how to close those loopholes, and then another one opens up, and then a marketer figures out how to exploit that, and it's just on and on ad infinitum. I never know how to say that. Forever. But I saw like on Reddit, which is interesting. Reddit was kind of the trustworthy source that like, people would append like Reddit to their Google searches just so they could get like peer reviews of certain things.
When you get like real people talking about something, like an optimized post, presumably,
right? So Reddit has risen in the rankings. They've had a massive like traffic rise. I think they have a Google partnership, and then I was messing around looking at like the SERPs for best SEO agencies, which, I want to appear on. And I saw like, number 4, there's a Reddit thread, and I click in, and it was so obvious and so apparent that some marketer had gamed it. It was like the post in general, like they had like an edit. It was like, just update. We went with firm here, and we have just been blown away by the quality of their service. They are not just a SEO agency, but a true thought partner, and like da 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 da. And I'm like, I would have written that, like that's definitely marketing copy. And then like you go in the thread and there's a couple more who are like, I chose blah, 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 because, they're a true thought partner, and it's got like all the boilerplate marketing copy. And I can see through that like easy, but I'm sure a lot of people can't actually. And I'm sure like that loophole actually right now works. Sure. And then eventually, because people are going to flood to that and the tragedy of the commons is going to be exploited, that loophole is going to close, and then a new one's going to open up.
Like Google, for example, may figure out how to because Google's incentivized to send you like good stuff too. So like, for example, or like, whatever you're searching on. So maybe there's something they figure that out too, and they start like, reducing their ranking or something like that too. But yeah, it's going to be like a constant battle. It's going to be constantly evolving and changing over time for sure.
It's kind of the fun of all this stuff.
Well, part of it too, like, one more point of this is that like part of what I think about as well is that in a way, like marketing and like persuasion is going to be more and more important. Because I think where you feel like a lot of people that, you read stuff about like, you do stuff like conversion optimization. You have a good idea of just like, here's like the phrasing that like gets people's attention and things like that. In some ways feel like, the more like trusted, like I think everybody needs to start buying into that, because like when there's so much information, it really does become kind of a persuasion battle. So it's like, you have to get people's attention. You have to keep their attention. You have to like build that trust. And I think what's happened a lot in the last 10 years is like the people that are like more in tune with that and willing to do that are also the ones that are like less interested in like showing the most accurate information. They're just like, they want to be an influencer. They don't want to like, share like the like best information and things like that. And more like traditional news sources, for example, I think they're like above that kind of thing, which, made sense probably 10, 20 years ago. But like, we almost like people are probably always going to get information like this in some kind of way at this point. So we also need to adapt our communication methods where it's like, hey, if you are like a research institution that needs to get information about cancer prevention or something, it's like you need to adopt these principles that like get people's attention and work so that you can compete with the ones that are using it for entertainment purposes or, personal influence purposes, things like that. Like it's kind of got to be a fire with fire kind of thing. And I think we've all got to recognize, hey, if we have some important information to get out, like, you have to do what you have to do to get that attention and, persuade people. Because the way people evaluate information, evaluate trust, all these kind of things has completely changed. And I think a lot of like everyone kind of needs to adapt with that too, and not think that they're like above marketing or things like that. Like a lot of it's even more important to like stand out and, build that trust quickly.
Totally. We're almost at time, but one more question that's completely tangential to everything we've talked about. You've kept a writing practice for the entire time that I've known you. And we talk together often about wanting to write more. And like, that seems to be a pretty salient focus for your own personal growth. So outside of any, well, I guess you could rope in like career benefits, but like what is the value to you of keeping a writing practice?
Personally, I mean, I also say from a behavior change perspective, it's definitely probably one of the harder habits I've tried to keep. I feel like I've never had something that totally works to do it all the time, but I largely just keep changing my system. I kind of keep trying to add like social pressure, things like that to kind of keep it up. Because yeah, it's one of those things I think for me, at least, it's not like a natural thing, but it is very valuable to me. So, I have to kind of, a good example, I was saying the behavior change stuff, something that personally I struggle with, but it's important enough to keep kind of experimenting and trying to do. I think the primary thing is I think it's just the best way to like refine your thinking. I think I'm definitely somebody who my brain's kind of going a million miles a minute. I have like all these kind of ideas running around. I think I just go crazy if I never really articulate some of these things. And writing is just the best way to do that. Again, it's like we're similar in that we like reading stuff versus watching videos. I think I'm saying that I'd rather like write it down than try to like record a video about it. And I think it's just a better like thought process. And the other benefit is like, if that's the personal benefit. I think also if you're thinking career-wise, it's just like getting your thinking out in a detailed way is just, whenever I've done it consistently, there's usually been good returns on it. It's hard to do. But getting my thinking out there, you always find somebody who's thinking the same way that you do, or like you're demonstrating some, like when I was getting started in behavioral science, like I didn't really have a formal background in this kind of stuff, but I was really passionate, really interested. And I kind of wrote a series of blog posts. So when I met people, I would kind of send them a link, and it was like, I don't even know if they read all of them, but it was a signal that like I put effort and time into this, and that like, oh, I am like passionate, that like I've taken the time to like write down my thinking. And even if it's not perfect, people can like evaluate your thought process, and it's like a way of demonstrating that. So, I think as a personal exercise, it's really good for your thinking. And I think it's still just as valuable as it ever was to just demonstrate like knowledge, demonstrate how you think, and kind of demonstrate an extra level of like effort to like what you care about. That's important. I think the written word will always be, even though we're shifting more of like a video culture in general, I think the written word will always be really important. Again, it might be a little more of like a premium kind of thing that, is more niche audiences or something, but I think it'll always be important. And personally, it's helpful for me.
Absolutely.
But it's a hard habit to have, for sure. It's
totally worth it, though, in my opinion. This was great. Where can people find you online?
So for me, I have a newsletter that was sporadic for a little while I was, adapting to parent life, but back into a good rhythm right now. So you can find that, call it 3BI. You basically get 3 behavioral insights in each edition. I think you can find it at erikjohnson.substack.com. Erik with a K, so Erik Johnson. That's the best way to keep in touch with me. I don't have another, otherwise you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not super active on there right now, but I'm working on being a little more active. Otherwise, I don't have super active like social media. I'm sort of like reevaluating where I want to like spend more time and post and all this kind of thing. So those are the best ways. You can also feel free to email me. You can meet me at Erik@erikj.net as well. Feel free to reach out.
Very apropos way to end the discussion with the same thing we started with, which is auditing your time and where you want to spend it. So this is great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not going to tell you to follow me on something where I know I'm not really doing anything right now. So just, that could change as time goes, for sure.
Right on.
Cool.